Last month, the Justice Department charged 2 former Twitter employees with spying on behalf of Saudi Arabia. According to reporting by the Washington Post, one of the alleged spies is an associate of the Saudi Crown Prince.
This comes months after Saudi Arabia issued a royal decree mandating the authority for data and artificial intelligence be established. So here to dig into all of this is staff writer at Vice's Motherboard. It's Edward Ongweso Jr. Welcome, Ed. It's great to see you.
Great to have you.
Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about this Saudi Arabian infusion of money into technology and our future developing companies, and why we should be concerned about it.
So Saudi Arabia's huge investments come largely out of its wealth that it's gotten from oil sales over the past few decades. And it's been invested through Public Investment Fund, which is like a sovereign wealth fund they have to try to help transition from oil-centric state or petrostate to a post-oil future. And so they've been investing mainly in technological or tech companies that they believe are going to be at the leading edge of the economy in the next few years, startups that are seeking to disrupt industries, whether that be Uber or Lyft or AI or any really startup or venture that can convince them to throw a lot of money now and then get a huge payout for the investment later. And I think it's more so something to pay attention to because it's important guiding factor for the dynamics of how certain tech companies are companies that we have to deal with. They're funding companies that are not profitable on their own. And because of that, because they're chasing a profit, because they're chasing this vision of a post-oil society, we have to deal with companies that are destroying local communities, businesses, infrastructure, all in the name of profits for foreign investors.
Is there any stigma that comes with taking this money? Because remember, after the brutal murder of Jamal Khashoggi, there was a backlash, their big summit they were going to have, a lot of companies and personalities pulled down of. Is that stigma still there, or have things just kind of gone back to normal?
A lot of people made a lot of gestures, but they still took the money. They still take the money to this day, and it doesn't really seem like they care. I think Kara Swisher wrote a pretty good piece asking and laying out the case for why we really shouldn't be taking money from Saudi Arabia, especially when in the case of Twitter, they had employees who were essentially spying on the company for the
Tell
country.
us a little bit about that.
So there's one prince in Saudi Arabia who has some major personal investments in Twitter, in Apple and Citigroup, and he had 2 associates who connected to him that were working at the company, embedded inside of it, and were just found to be passing information along.
Wow.
I think that this is a concern for some people from like a national security standpoint, but I think the larger picture that gets lost in it is that we are in the middle of like a moment where they don't really care. Blood money is still green.
I think you're right, Ed. And it's not just about I mean, there is a national security thing, but there's what it is to me is about the fact that these companies don't view themselves as American, and not just American from a national perspective. They don't view themselves with any real covenant with their workers, it seems to me. Especially in the case of Uber. I mean, you can talk about this, but isn't Saudi Arabia literally on their board, or there's a Saudi holding company that's on the board of that company, and the CEO himself has nothing to say about that?
Yeah, Saudi Arabia is double invested into Uber. So they have the Public Investment Fund, and the governor of that is on the board of Uber. And then they also have the SoftBank Vision Fund, which is like this $100 billion VC fund. And they've invested another $45 billion into that. So they're pretty big on the board, have a good amount of control over what happens in the company, but there's really going to be no accountability for that because Uber needs their money and because all these other companies need their money.
Well, you see it in this town, the way that our influence is exerted. I mean, how many of these think tanks, et cetera, here are funded by Saudi money? And so it means when people are reliant on money from Saudi Arabia or other potentially bad actors, it means that when they do something wrong, the criticism isn't there. Like you said, there may be some token gestures, but there's no real change in the American relationship with them, in our ability to exert influence and power over what they're doing. There's just no desire or willingness to do that when people's pockets are being lined.
Yeah, and it speaks to there's at multiple levels, there's a sort of hypocrisy going on. Like I think about how today, Greta Thunberg was just named Person of the Year, but also by people who in their own circles or probably themselves are not really going to take steps to, divest or diverge their companies away from Saudi Arabia, which in of itself is reliant on the sort of economic activity that is driving climate change and is pouring that money into technological investments or tech companies also. So if they were to actually stop the tap, you know, it would, I think, result in a bunch of cascading events that they're not ready for or not interested in.
Ed, talk about that and what kind of reforms could come to these tech companies. I mean, ultimately, I don't think any of this will get done without the government. Are there any lawmakers that are talking about this? Are there any lawmakers who are talking about putting in different restrictions on the type of capital that these companies can receive?
I haven't seen people talk about it except in the sort of general language similar to China, for example, like when talking about how we need these tech companies to be present because if we don't have them, you know, Chinese alternatives are going to be the dominant ones.
Right.
But in terms of the capital funding, I don't see it really. I mainly see VCs talking about it, and even then it's like there's some who take a stand and not accept the money, but we'll take money from other problematic sources, right? We'll take money from other autocratic governments or from other venture funds that are specifically focused on raising money that other people wouldn't touch.
Very interesting,
really
stuff.
interesting.
Ed, thank you so much for your reporting on this.
Thank you, Ed.
Coming up, the McKinsey client list is out, plus we're digging into the latest Quinnipiac polling.
Team Rising gives their take, and that's next.